Greetings, everyone. I am very excited and honored today to be in conversation with Judy Tsafrir, who, let me give her brief bio, and then we're going to be in conversation about her practice and her upcoming book. Judy is a holistic psychiatrist with a private practice in Newton, Massachusetts. She's a board-certified adult and child psychiatrist and psychoanalyst, is on the faculty of Harvard Medical School and the Boston Psychoanalytic Institute, and teaches and supervises at the Cambridge Health Alliance. She has particular interest in combining spiritual developmental approaches to healing and is a practitioner of a variety of energy healing and esoteric modalities, and is dedicated to healing through the integration of heart, mind, body, soul, the biosphere, and the cosmos. And her upcoming book that's coming out January 2024 is Sacred Psychiatry, Bridging the Personal and Transpersonal to Transform Health and Consciousness. So thank you for being here today, Judy, and for the profound work that you're doing.
Well, thank you so much, Heather, for inviting me and giving me this wonderful opportunity to speak with you.
So I want to get into talking about your book and some of what you cover in your book. But before we get into that, you and I were talking before we got into the interview about some of the similarities in our journeys. But talk some about how you moved from doing a more traditional practice into integrating the holistic modalities that is now so much at the heart of what you do.
So I was never exactly a conventional psychiatrist, because when things began to change in my practice, I was practicing as an adult and child psychoanalyst, which is already not typical for a psychiatrist. And my practice was mostly psychoanalysis and psychotherapy. I never was much of one for prescribing medications, but I did do that as well. And then it was just preceding my Chiron return when my marriage ended, and I had 3 young children, and that was on July 2nd, 2005. And on July 24th, my father died. And then on November 6th, my mom died. So it was just a confluence of very huge losses. And I consulted an astrologer for the first time. I had been familiar with astrology. My dad was interested in astrology. He was also a psychiatrist and psychoanalyst, but he was very much in the closet about it. He was very fearful for his reputation. And I was so fascinated by my meeting with the astrologer, her name was Nikolai Bailey, that I was astonished at how much insight she had into me and my life, that I went back to see her multiple times. I mean, I was used to the model of psychoanalysis. So I thought nothing of returning repeatedly to see an astrologer.
That's great.
And I looked at the charts of my children. I looked at the charts of my family of origin, and eventually decided that I wanted to learn to read charts and learn astrology myself. And that began a whole journey where I began this apprenticeship with Stephen Forrest, and eventually, after I completed that, studied with Maurice Fernandez. And somehow the study of astrology opened me up spiritually and holistically, or maybe I was opening up spiritually, and that I just became curious about incorporating all kinds of different modalities into the work that I was doing. And my first foray into something that was unconventional was studying with Natasha Campbell McBride, who is a Russian neurologist who had written a book that was way ahead of her time. It was called The Gut and Psychology Syndrome.
Mm.
And I'm not sure when it was published, maybe 2009 or 10, but it was way ahead of all of this, what's now very commonplace discussion of the microbiome and its impact upon immunity and mental health. This was not being talked about at all. And I learned from her an approach to treating psychiatric conditions that was primarily dietary, but a lot of focus on what supports the immune system and what harms the immune system. And I started implementing her approach in my practice. And just organically, I have Mars in Pisces, and things get sort of tossed up on the shore, and I follow the breadcrumbs. And so I'll hear a podcast, and oh, that's really, really interesting. And so I came across the work of William Walsh, who's a biochemist in Chicago who has a whole approach to psychiatric illness using nutrients. So I learned about that. And then I had started writing a blog in 2011, and a reader wrote to me and said, given all of your interests, I think you'd be very interested in learning about the effect of toxic mold on people, because that can cause a lot of psychiatric illness. And I thanked her and I filed it. And I was at that time doing a training in Kundalini yoga, and part of the training required that I do it like an hour-long home practice. And I had a finished basement, so I was going down into the basement and doing this practice with heavy breathing, and started to feel more and more and more ill, depressed, anxious, headache, ears ringing. I was like, what is going on with me? To the point that I was too ill to go down the basement to practice. And as soon as I stopped going down the basement, I started to feel very quickly better. And then I thought of that email that this person had written to me, and I pulled it out and started following the links that she had sent me. And that evolved into learning about how to treat toxic mold, because I got my basement tested. It was, very moldy. There had been water damage after a botched construction job. And I started studying with Neil Nathan, who became a mentor of mine, and then began to treat patients for mold toxicity in my practice. And simultaneously, I became interested in shamanism and started doing some training with the Foundation for Shamanic Studies, and just sort of studied Reiki. I seemed to be just drawn to learning many, many things to bring back to my practice. And but it all started with my Chiron return, those losses, and kind of reaching for the stars.
Well, and it's beautiful with your Chiron return, not only dealing with some of what got activated by all those losses, but exploring more the range of healing. And it's interesting listening to you, because you both started exploring more ancient healing modalities like shamanism, astrology, but also cutting edge understandings of nutrition and how systemic issues are related to problems with the microbiome. And so it's really interesting. You just started broadening your spectrum of understanding of healing.
Right. And I very much believe that you can't leave out any of those parts. If a person has a lousy diet and they have a lot of inflammation in their body, they usually don't feel well. I mean, the body and the brain are not disconnected. And if they have inflammation in their body, they also have it in their brain. And when people are inflamed, they feel anxious and they feel depressed and they feel contracted and they don't feel expansive. So I think it's very important, if one is going to feel available to feel connected spiritually, that there's a lot of attention paid to the body and to the nervous system and to the limbic system and calming all of that down and supporting that. As well as, like the psychology, like that was the beginning, all of the psychoanalysis. But that's also still part of it, like you can't leave out anything.
Well, it is, as you say in your book, it's body, mind, and spirit. Right. And part of what I really love and respect is that you're concerned with getting at what is at the root of the imbalance, what is at the root of the issue, rather than so much of traditional psychiatry is just giving medications to deal with the symptom. Absolutely. But never getting to the core root of what the problem is.
Right. It's like identify symptoms, see what diagnosis that correlates with, and then follow an algorithm to prescribe the appropriate pharmaceuticals. And when one doesn't work, then try another one. If you have side effects, then add another one to suppress the side effects. It's very broken and actually harmful.
Toxic.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's beautiful that you've had the courage to break out of that paradigm and really follow a path of healing.
Right. Well, it's definitely been a path of my own construction. There's that saying, "Go pilgrim, there is no path. The path is made by walking." That's what it's been like.
Talk more about your integration with astrology, because that, I think, as you describe in the book, really shifted your understanding both of what's going on currently and the stresses in the world, but also I love one of the themes that you talk about in the book is that it supports us in seeing each person in their uniqueness. To me, that's one of the gifts of astrology versus a more traditional psychological or psychiatric perspective, which describes a normative way of being a healthy person, whereas from an astrological perspective, being healthy and whole is being who you uniquely are.
Right. And very much related to your life purpose, right? There's no connection in conventional psychology about life purpose. This is definitely changing, but traditionally there's been such a focus upon pathologizing. And like Channing Nichols, or I think that's her name, she has a book called The Astrology for Radical Acceptance. And I just love the whole notion of radical acceptance of the birth chart. There's a reason that you have a Venus in Leo. Like, what are you, intended to do with that? What's the spiritual function of it? And where is your North Node? And what does that have to say about your heavenly mandate? And I always, like on my intake paperwork, I always get people's birth data. And I mention to them, that if that's of interest to them, we can take a look at that and look at things through that lens in addition to other lenses. It's a self-selected group that consults with me. Like, I'm out of the closet as an astrologer, and it's on my website that's one of the things that I'm trained in. And especially these days, it's really changed so much and so rapidly. There's an interest in astrology in a way that there never was previously. It's kind of astonishing. So people are very interested and curious, and they and then, somebody who I see over time, they say, "Can we look at my chart? Like, what's going on?"
And don't you find that it gives you such a deeper insight more rapidly into the core themes or issues that the person is dealing with?
Yeah, it does. It does.
And you're also an evolutionary astrologer, like I am.
Like you.
And one of the things that I have found incredibly valuable with that, in terms of when I was doing more therapeutic work, is the way in which, from that perspective, you not only get clarity about the soul's intentions in terms of what is our growing edge, what are we here to learn and experience in this lifetime, but you see the theme of possible past life trauma, which to me was incredibly helpful in understanding some aspects of what the person was struggling with that didn't always seem clear given their life experience in this incarnation. but suddenly it would give more insight into what else they were trying to heal and clear.
Yeah. Yeah, very much so.
So do you integrate that on an ongoing basis in your clinical work?
I integrate astrology if a person has an interest in that. It can be very helpful in terms of like when people have major, like in my book, I wrote about one person who was having and is still having like Pluto contacting her IC, at the same time that she's having her Chiron return. So there's like a timeline there, like things are, undergoing like huge and profound transformation, but you can kind of look further out and anticipate that it's not going to be so intense, after a certain point. Like once Pluto moves off of her Capricorn IC and Chiron gets beyond her, 16 degrees Chiron in her chart, things are going to, feel different.
So it both gives her a kind of context for what she's dealing with, but also a time frame.
Yes. And yeah. And the context, like, well, this is just how people very often feel when they're having this kind of, huge transformational energy impacting their birth chart.
And in your book, you talk about the many different modalities that you incorporate in your practice. It's really quite a spectrum of ways of energy healing, esoteric modalities that you incorporate. Say more about some of the other tools that you use in your practice.
Well, I'll use flower essences sometimes and essential oils sometimes. I'll talk with patients about developing a spiritual practice because many patients don't know how to do that. And that's a part of the source of their suffering. And like they're interested, but they just don't know how. And so I have different ideas about things that they can do that would be helpful. So do you know Angeles Arian, the cultural anthropologist? I love her work. And so one thing I'll talk about patients with is the blessing way, which she described. She went around the world and studied the spiritual traditions of cultures around the world. And she looked for commonalities, like what were common practices across all of these different cultures. And she identified 3. And the first one was prayer. Like in every tradition, people pray. And some people are allergic to that word or that suggestion, but like setting an intention or asking for guidance like that feels like maybe more comfortable. But prayer is important. And I talk with them about, do you know Annie Lamott, the writer?
Yes.
She has some charming books about spirituality and writing. But she said there's 3. She has a book that's called, I always can't remember the sequence of how you say this, but there's 3 essential prayers: help, wow, thanks. Like help.
Or maybe help, thanks, wow.
Yeah, it might go like that. Yeah. Like that those are the 3 essential prayers. And, to be like attuned to that, to help is the prayer. Thanks is the second part of the blessing way. That's gratitude. Now, wow is not incorporated in the blessing way, but it's kind of part of gratitude. The third part of the blessing way is doing something that increases the sum of goodness in the world. Like, so some kind of active
service.
Some active service. Maybe you make a donation. Maybe you do something that is not in your ordinarily what you would do to help somebody, to uplift somebody, but to create more beauty. So I talk with patients about that. And
circling back to the wow, I love that actually. Do you know Abraham Joshua Heschel's work?
Yes.
Awe is the beginning of wisdom. Mm-hmm. There's something about the wow that is also about reverence.
Exactly.
into that awareness of the wonder,
Right.
interconnectedness of all that is.
Exactly. Exactly. So, like, I'll recommend to my patients that this has a twofold function. I mean, there's a lot of evidence that getting morning sunlight really is very, very good for the organism. So, like, I ask that patients, if they're going to work with me, that it's a lot of work to work with me. There's a lot of things that I ask people to do. And when they do them, it's so effective. So, like, if people can get outside and in fresh air, and preferably in the morning, but if not, do what they can. But and to leave your headphones at home, like we're all, and I'm as guilty of this as the next person. There's so many interesting things to listen to, but leave your headphones at home and just tune into what you're noticing and your thoughts and looking and
connecting with nature.
Connecting with nature, So, like, I mean, that can stimulate a wow. Like, I just heard this podcast where a person was talking about delight and noticing like moments of delight, which is kind of like wow, and like if you have a friend, you can text each other pictures of things that just delight you, like, and it increases your awareness of what's delightful. And that's so important. I mean, our brains are hardwired for being aware of what's stressful and dangerous. And so you really need to use your consciousness to try to shift your focus and attention to noticing what's delightful and beautiful.
Well, and I love your emphasis on getting out in the sunlight, particularly around the time of sunrise. I mean, there's so many ancient healing traditions around connecting to that energy of the sun. And
that's something to your brain,
Yes. And it expands the pineal gland.
Mm-hmm.
So it not only brings in healing to us, but it also opens up our conscious awareness, our spiritual awareness.
Yes. Yes.
Beautiful.
So, and then I'll talk with patients like about making an altar, like create an altar, like just to increase their awareness of the spiritual dimension of themselves, like it doesn't have to be a whole dedicated room. It can be a little corner of a room, but to put down a beautiful cloth and a bowl that they fill with water daily and ask for refreshment of their soul and healing of the waters of the earth, or where they have fresh flowers, or just something that gets them out of just the grind and the survival.
And also into a greater sense of connection.
Exactly.
With the energies of the cosmos, with their ancestors, with their spirit guides.
Right. Right.
Beautiful.
And I'll talk with patients about like things that are really like not considered in any kind of way mainstream, like making offerings, like in our culture, so that that the spirits like to be in a reciprocal relationship, and they also like to be thanked, and they like to be asked out loud. They don't interfere if you don't ask them, and they like to be thanked with. So I'll say, find like a tree that you love and take some lentils or some rice and make an offering and say thank you.
Beautiful.
I mean, when people do stuff like this, it really does uplift them and changes their consciousness.
And brings them back into communion with the life around them and with the other realms.
Yeah.
And say more about how you incorporate shamanic work in what you do with your healing practice.
Well, I mean, just personally myself, like I drum every morning, mostly every morning. And I think about my day ahead, and I ask for guidance and assistance with the people that I'm going to be seeing for the day. And I mentioned to you, as we were talking before, that I recently did a training in Ketamine Assisted Psychotherapy. And So I'm offering that in my practice with really quite remarkable results. And I do it in a sacred and ceremonial way. So that's like the most formal way that I will incorporate shamanic practice now with my patients, because we will call in the directions, call in the ancestors and spirit guides, and smudge and set intentions. And, often we'll draw an oracle card, and we'll set the whole thing up so that it's done in a very sacred and ceremonial way rather than some kind of medicalized way. And that's the most, like, I would sometimes I think about it, like I'd love to get a big gong, and like I would like to like sound the gong before any patient I saw, like even if they're just coming for a medical evaluation, because like it just changes the whole vibration,
Yeah, absolutely.
um, tenor of the interaction, because I do feel like it's all sacred.
Absolutely. It's interesting too. In my practice, I found doing shamanic journeying with people very helpful in looking for that connection with their spirit guides or getting guidance or input about the issues that they were dealing with. But you're probably doing a version of that with the ketamine therapy that you're doing with people. Say a bit more about your experience with that.
Well, I did this training at the end of May, beginning of June, which was one of the very best trainings that I ever have done. It was led by two women. It was very, there was a lot of staff and ratio with the participants who were learning. So there was an awful lot of support to learn and then we would sit in circles together and share our experiences. So like I myself took ketamine several times and would hear about all the experiences of the other 15 participants. So it gave like an appreciation of the wide range of possible experiences. It was a week long, and it's excellent. And so the way that I do it in my practice is with the route of administration is a lozenge, which is compounded. Ketamine can be administered intramuscularly, and it can be administered IV. But both of those other methods are much more intense. And ketamine is not something that you can say, okay, a person weighs this much and therefore their dosage should be this. It's very much dependent upon their own nervous system and sensitivity, tolerance. And so you have to find the dosage that's correct. And the dosage that I feel is like the sweet spot is when they really are quite altered, but still capable of conversing. So, they'll put the lozenge under their tongue, and in the beginning, you always start with a low dose, and it was described to me as like shaking hands with ketamine. So they just get like a little bit of a taste of it, and then they hold it under their tongue, and after 12, 15 minutes, they swallow, and then you wait another 12 minutes and then offer an additional dose. And it's important to offer an additional dose because it's so short acting that if you just have the initial dose, it's just over so quickly. So it's about 45 minutes to an hour and a half, the very altered state. And so then like they lay down on the couch, they're wearing an eye shade, and I play music, like beautiful music, that's very evocative, and like special music for journeying. And if they're quiet, I'll say to them, so what are you noticing now? And sometimes a person just wants to be quiet, but sometimes a person can be quite talkative. And it's, when I did the training, the person who I sat with, she had an experience of the most intense anguish and grief that I have ever witnessed being another person. And it was quite a lot to bear for me to, like, she just really didn't want to come back to her body. And, but once she was back, she was in good spirits. It was like a storm had come through, and it didn't linger like that, terrible, terrible grief. But in my practice, like I've had some experiences with patients being quite sad and crying, but very often people feel a lot of heart opening and bliss and a state of great relaxation and a break from their usual state of mind, which for some people, when they are feeling really quite depressed or anxious, it's just such a relief to have a break. And I've just seen like very amazing transformation where people just feel so much better and so quickly, compared to many of the other modalities that I have made use of in the past.
Like it's giving them a different perspective or a higher consciousness of what they're dealing with often.
Yeah, and sometimes it doesn't really even seem like it's articulated what exactly that is, but that they just, it promotes neurogenesis, it promotes neuroplasticity. So like there's an area of our brain that's called the default mode network, and I think it's the posterior cingulate gyrus or anterior, and it's the area of the brain that kind of is responsible for these sort of thoughts that we have, like again and again, these repetitive kinds of thoughts, and it allows that to shift. It like shuts that down and something new can come in. Sometimes people can articulate, like what is different, but like I'm thinking of one man who just was constantly like expecting rejection, and therefore it would make him like not reach out to people and be kind of suspicious and really keep to himself. And after the sessions with ketamine, he just felt so much more open and so much more available for connecting with other people, and like texting his coworkers beautiful images from his morning hike and that kind of thing. He would have never ever done that before. It's astonishing.
So it takes people out of their repetitive patterns or beliefs or thoughts about themselves and expands their perspective.
Yeah.
What was your experience with it?
Well, my experience was meaningful, but not full of feeling. Like I had like sort of an intellectual experience where in one of the journeys, like so we did it once with a lozenge and once with intramuscular, which is very intense and shoots you kind of into like a different consciousness. And so I was like having a lot of hallucinations and seeing a lot of patterns and shapes, and really it was quite beautiful, but I was more like, yeah, like, okay, like, so like, what am I supposed to like make of that? And like, so what is the function or the purpose of that? Like, and it kind of gave me this mirror to the way that I am, like in a way that, like I'd like to change, like how about just like enjoying the experience,
As opposed to your Virgo analytical mind
Exactly.
trying to decipher it all.
Exactly. Like how about just like being in it? And that stuck with me, and I aspire to be more, just being with things, rather than like trying to analyze them.
That's great. That's great. I haven't experienced ketamine, but I've done, had some different experiences with plant medicines.
Yeah.
Psilocybin and ayahuasca. And from my perspective, it can be such different experiences at different times, but it's as if we're being given the experience we need in that moment to be in that next step of our healing or our own self-awareness.
Yeah, I think, one thing that I want to mention about the ketamine I don't know what you said that exactly. Like I have used other psychedelic medicines and they've been enormously helpful to me, especially in this whole process of writing the book. But I had one experience with MDMA that was like a peak spiritual experience for me, where I just felt in a way that I have never felt so profoundly, like without judgment and with appreciation for everything and others, and including myself. And it was like, I can recall that state, what that felt like. And like with the ketamine, very often patients get to this very heart opened, expanded state. And I'll ask them to try to recall that and sort of imprint that and really, really notice that, because there's another, it's like a mind, body, spirit training that I recommend to most of my patients. It's called the Gupta program, and it's a limbic system retraining system. And one of the brain retraining exercises is to recall some kind of peak experience. And so that you are kind of entraining the brain in that way. And so I'll kind of ask them to use their experiences in the ketamine and bring it back to the Gupta program. And that's powerful, because like that experience that I had with the MDMA is something that I do hold on to. You know, I remember what that felt like.
So it becomes a new template that you can keep coming back to.
Yes.
But the other thing that you're talking about with the ketamine that I think is really important is it sounds like it can bring people more fully into their hearts and be a heart opening experience. And I think that is one of the challenges in our modern culture, and part of what leads people into a lot of anxiety and depression is we are so focused on being in the mind and having that illusion of control, or that experience from more left brain ways of being, of feeling separate from what's around us. Whereas it sounds like this brings people more into
their heart and into a state of connection and connect. Yeah. Definitely. That's very true. And they have that experience of that they can remember. Yeah.
That then becomes transformational.
Yeah, it you know, like in the training, one of the leaders said, like, people treat ketamine like the redheaded stepchild, like it's like sort of second class, and it's like the only thing that's legal, but you know, the good stuff is like the MDMA and psilocybin. She said she really disagreed with that, and according to my own experience in my practice, I'm also feeling like it is very valuable just in and of itself.
Beautiful. You know, one of the other things that you talk about in the book, I think you talk about it as astrological weather, the energies of this time that we're in, which is such a profound time of transition and transformation. Are you seeing, because this is something that I've been really aware of in the last few years, that as we're in these larger astrological shifts, I'm seeing an accelerated process of people being on more of a path of healing and awakening. I mean, back when I was first practicing decades ago, there would be such a kind of meticulous step-by-step process of going through the layers of healing and working through issues. And it feels like with the larger astrological shifts that are calling us into this paradigm shift and into the age of Aquarius, that there's such a more rapid possibility of healing and transformation. Are you seeing that?
That's so interesting that you say that, because I have been noticing that, and I didn't connect the dots that way. I was like, oh, like I think I was thinking of it more like I really have, you know, like discovered like a strategy that is like really, really working.
Well, that's true too.
But it may be that a lot of it is related to the times that's what's happening, because I mean, people can feel really better very quickly.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think
But
part
they
of
don't feel better if they don't do what I say.
that's great. But I do, from my perspective, it's partly the, Pluto in those final degrees of Capricorn, but also the Pluto square the lunar nodes, that it feels to me that people are either on a more accelerated path of healing or often on a more regressive path, getting more and more caught in whatever their issues are that are unresolved. So I think that's part of the polarization that we're seeing on the planet, these very different trajectories. But it has felt to me like it really creates a context for people to heal more rapidly and expand their consciousness more rapidly.
That's really interesting. Like I hadn't like put that together. Like I said, like I also just like I wondered if there was something different with me because like people were getting better so much faster. And I didn't know if it like like as you get older, like people have a transference to you that is different.
It also sounds like, and you talk some about this in your book, which is really excellent book, by the way. I highly recommend it to people, and it gives such a good sense of the range of modalities that you've integrated in your holistic practice. But it also feels to me like you're more and more comfortable with the unique synthesis
That's so
of
true.
how you're doing your healing
That's
process.
so true. I'm bringing more and more like I'm like, I mean, I am neither fish nor fowl. Like I'm not just like a plain astrologer. I'm definitely not just like a plain medical doctor, and I'm like really like increasingly out of the closet, like I think my colleagues would think I was like crazy calling in the directions before I give, a patient a medication. But I feel more empowered to do that. And I don't have to like pretend to be conventional. I feel more empowered to be authentically myself.
Because having been in that journey of transformation myself, it felt to me like there was a period where I was trying to straddle the worlds.
Yeah. Yeah.
And when I finally fully embraced being on my own unique path, then it really allowed me to be more authentic and present. And I think it really impacted how I was then in my process with the people that I was working with.
I think that's really interesting. And I think that's true. I mean, I definitely feel that about myself. I did think of it, but not so clearly as like the way that you're articulating it. But I am like just more comfortable in my own skin as like this, like an unusual psychiatrist.
Wise healing woman.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And we've got to talk about that beautiful white lion behind you. Talk about, you open the book and then you circle back to it at the end of the book about your experience with the white lions in South Africa.
I love the lions, and I love the white lions, and I love the message of the white lions. In 2013, I went with Maurice Fernandez, who was an astrology teacher of mine, to visit the white lions in Timbavati. And the white lions in the African, I guess, Shangan tradition, there's a legend that the lions are star beings who came to Earth during the Ice Age to help people learn how to survive. And then they went away again, and that they would only return if the people were again in grave danger, which we are now. And now they're back. The white lions are being born again. And their message is that either we recognize our interconnectedness with all things and bow to the primacy of nature, or we're going to go extinct. And that definitely does seem to be like what is going on now. And I mean, the lions have become like a guide for me in my meditations, or, shamanically when I need courage, want to be able to come more fully from my heart, like I'll call upon them to be with me, to assist me. I associate, like I have my own system I associate an animal with each of my chakras, and I have names for all of the animals. And so the lions are associated with my crown chakra, and I call them Or Lavan Gadol, and that's Hebrew, and it means great white light.
Beautiful, beautiful.
Yeah.
So they're really ongoing guides for you in your life and in your practice.
Yeah. I love them. I love lions. I have different statues of lions outside, and I love them.
Can I ask what the animal is for your heart?
It's the dolphin.
So that sensitivity and empathic attunement.
Playfulness. I think of dolphins as like there's some kind of unusual intelligence that isn't left brain.
Well, and I feel like in this time that we're in, as you were saying, the white lions return when we're in another time of danger as humanity. And as you and I were talking about before the interview, a lot of my research is into the precessional cycle and the awareness that it's every 12,000 years at the beginning and ending of a precessional cycle and the midpoint that we go through these times of major change, both in terms of earth changes, but also shifts in human consciousness. But we're at one of those critical choice points now. And it is such a crucial karmic choice point for us as humanity to either radically shift our way of being, come back into right harmony, right balance with the life around us, or go through a cataclysmic reset as we did 12,000 years ago.
Yeah.
So it feels like the animals, the white lions, but other animals like the dolphins, the whales, the elephants, are really trying to bring their wisdom to us. And it feels to me from an energetic and shamanic perspective that the veils between the worlds are thinner now, so that we have more access to that communion with them and the wisdom of the plants, the healing energy of the plants.
And connection with the ancestors themselves.
Yeah.
It
sounds like those are part of your guides helping you in your practice, but also that you're supporting other people that you're working with and connecting more with them.
Absolutely. Like before the ketamine, like who would you like to bring in, and one person always brought in his grandmother, and we always invited her in and invite them in by name. It's very supportive and feels very real to me.
Beautiful. To me, your whole synthesis, your holistic way of working represents the paradigm that we're needing to move into with psychiatry, with healing in that more holistic way, mind, body, spirit. But what's your sense of what's happening in medicine right now in this incredible time of change, and what the
like breakdown, right? Like the suicide rate of doctors is like twice that of the general population. I mean, doctors are absolutely as unhappy as patients, and patients in general don't trust doctors. Like there's just a big distrust, and it's deserved because there's no opportunity for thoughtfulness or things that are preventative in terms of healthcare. Like it's all, again, dealing with symptoms and giving pharmaceuticals, which often are toxic in and of themselves. There's a device that's called the continuous glucose monitor, which is like a sensor that you apply to your upper arm, and then you have a app on your phone, and you can just monitor your blood sugar, and you can monitor Like, what happens when you eat rice? What happens when you eat sweet potatoes? What happens when you eat chicken? Like how is your blood sugar impacted? And it's brilliant in terms of people trying to keep their blood sugar stable and within like a range that is healthful. And blood sugar has everything to do with inflammation. And like, you can only get it paid for by insurance if you are a type 1 diabetic. Even if you are pre-diabetic, like your hemoglobin A1C, which is a measure of the blood sugar over time, is elevated and heading in the direction of diabetes, you do not qualify to have it paid for by insurance unless you're frankly diabetic. It's all so misguided. Like, it would be so helpful for that to be offered to people to help them avoid becoming diabetic. And, just like the whole for-profit nature and the control of medicine by the pharmaceutical companies, it's unholy, and it's, people can't pay for their insulin and have to ration it. And there's certain therapies that people can only avail themselves of if they're wealthy because they're too expensive. And doctors don't learn in medical school about nutrition, which is so fundamental to well-being. Yeah. And, very often don't have any kind of in-depth discussion with their patients about what they are eating. Simple things can be done. Like when I went to a integrative medicine conference a few years ago before the pandemic, and there was a holistic integrative neurologist who's written a lot of books. He's famous, Daniel Perlmutter. He said if he would give patients one prescription, it would be sneakers. Like that does just like amazing things for a person's health, is moving their body. But, everything like moving your body, not drinking alcohol, like having like a whole foods diet, like it requires like a lot of the patient themselves, like it's not just like take this pill and I'll see you again in 6 months. It's not like that. It requires, Margaret Mead said it's easier to change a person's religion than their diet,
That's probably true. But I think, what you're talking about is from a bigger perspective. I do think that Pluto in Capricorn is showing us the deconstruction of systems and structures that are out of balance. And the whole traditional medical system is completely out of balance.
Completely out of balance, broken.
So we need more holistic practitioners like you who are really integrating mind, body, spirit healing. But also, I think we're seeing this movement into new paradigms that are coming from the grassroots level, like the People's Health Alliance, starting a whole new way of forming practitioners connecting in local communities to provide services. But also, I think you're talking about the importance for each of us to take responsibility for our own health and our own healing journeys.
Right, especially these days, like there's so much that's overwhelming and frightening, and like there's so much evidence of collapse in multiple dimensions that you just can't afford to like not feel your best, to just be able to surf the waves of what's coming at all of us.
Yeah. So we're really each needing to take charge of our own journey of healing on all levels and support each other in that and collaborate, I think, in developing new paradigms for how we can move forward in supporting each other in healing.
Right. Finding like-minded community is like essential also to healing and health. Like people are so lonely and so isolated, like people used to go to the movies and watch something, all of them together. And now everybody's on their couch with their Netflix, like there's so many fewer communal experiences, and people can avoid leaving their house so much because everything gets delivered to their doorstep. And it erodes connection.
Well, and one of the things that I think is so sad within the traditional medical system is there is no relationship anymore between physicians and their patients. There's no time for a relationship. And I think part of what you're also describing in terms of your holistic healing practice is not only the range of ways of working that you incorporate, but the importance of developing a true relationship with the person that you're working with. To me, that healing dynamic of the relationship is one of the most powerful aspects of the healing process.
100%. 100%. And like people go to a conventional medical practice, they're always seeing somebody different. And, and the appointments are very short, and the burden on the provider is to fill out tons of paperwork and interact with the medical record. And it's a very dehumanizing experience often for both sides.
Yeah. So we're in this intense time of transition, and I think we're seeing the possibility of the new paradigms, and they are going to be more integrative and holistic and incorporating energy healing as you're doing. But we're in the midst of that transition and also seeing the deconstruction of the old forms in a way that's creating a lot of chaos.
It is creating a lot of chaos. Things are changing so rapidly, so rapidly. I mean, one of the things that I find so fascinating is just how quickly everything changed about gender. I mean, that was in like the last 5 years that it's been at least a conversation, like so ubiquitously, like it's incredible.
Yeah. And that to me is also very much a part of the Aquarian paradigm that we're moving into, that is more understanding of diversity on all levels.
Right. That there's that people don't want to be confined by categories that like existed forever. That these kinds of things are also now available to be questioned.
So it is such an accelerated time of change. And just one of the other things I want to touch on before we stop is I love that an image that is very powerful for you in terms of your understanding of healing is a bridge.
Mm-hmm.
And I think given what we're talking about with the chaos that's happening and the increasing disconnection, there's something profound about the ways in which the Aquarian paradigms are helping us open to diversity, but remember our interconnectedness and come back into that understanding of the bridge, of the things that connect us and help us also through this transition time. But say more about the meaning of that symbol for you.
I have a bridge in my garden, and I have a little troll sitting underneath it and a goat walking over it. And I love the idea. I mean, I'm a Libra sun, like I like to make connections. And it is so important to connect the dots. It's so important to connect things that seem disparate, to integrate polarities, like the Temperance card and the Tarot. I also think about like there's some, it's like a Jewish song, and it's something about like walking over a narrow bridge that and there being like a very like deep chasm below, and like to hold on to faith and courage, as we cross this bridge from one age to another, because we are like bridging worlds and bridging eras. And what I understand about AI is that it's going to transform things in ways that we can't even imagine, that things are going to be so different. It's going to make like the advent of the smartphone or the computer just seem like nothing in comparison. So like, it's just, I think we can't even imagine like what's coming. And I think it does require, to have faith and courage, because it's very easy to become fearful during times like this.
I love that bridge. The bridge over the chasm, and the bridge that can help us move between one age and the next, and this transition that we're in. It's a beautiful image. Well, anything else you'd like to add before we stop our conversation today?
Well, there's one thing we didn't touch on that is like an important part of my practice. Are these like medical conditions that are not recognized as treatable, like mast cell activation or Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, and the mycotoxin toxicity. That patients will present as very depressed and anxious, and there's a treatable cause, or there's a cause that can be identified, and if not treatable, it's helpful to know what the cause is, even if you can't like cure it, but you can support the person. And I wish that more psychiatrists recognize these conditions, because it's very damaging to patients when they're treated like it's all in their head.
Yeah. I'm really glad you brought that up, Judy, because that's one of the things I really respect about you too, is not only your holistic approach, but your understanding of some of these complex systemic issues and autoimmune issues, and how to address them in a more multi-layered, multi-leveled way, multi-dimensional way.
Right. It's all important, to every different aspect and approach. You can't leave anything out, or otherwise, like another thing that is in the book is about relationships and toxic relationships. I mean, a person can't heal, if they're in like a relationship that's really destructive to their feeling of safety and self-esteem.
So again, some of your gift is looking at what is the root of the issue, and is there a physical cause? Is there something that's really impacting the person's health at that physical level? Is it a relationship or a stress at the emotional level? Or is it disconnection at the spiritual level that you're really...
Or and.
Yeah, looking at the full range of and complexity of who we are and how to address all of that.
Right. And, like in, a regular conventional medical practice, there's no time for that kind of exploration or thoughtfulness.
Well, thank you for the work that you're doing. Thank you for the holistic approach that you're not only modeling, but teaching and sharing and helping others heal with that approach. And thank you for your understanding of how that fits in with the larger perspective of what we're dealing with in this time as well.
And thank you, Heather, for this really wonderful opportunity to share my thoughts. And also, I am appreciative of the conversation in ways that it stimulated new thoughts for me. And all the work that you do. Oh my gosh, all the work that you do, and the way in which you bring different ways of looking at things to so many people.
Oh, well, thank you. Your book is coming out January of 2024, January 2nd. But it can be pre-ordered now. Is that?
Yes, it can be. Yep.
Correct. Great. Wonderful. Well, thank you very much. And thank everyone for listening to this conversation.
Thanks, Heather.